Greetings, travelers. Generic Glamour here. Welcome to the end. That's right, this is the last guide for the last job of Shadowbringers. Yep, Summoner was the last job added to the game. That sounds about right. It's been a journey of learning that Paladin doesn't make any sense and that Black Mage casts Fire 4. I think this series went from mostly memes to mostly information to a solid middle ground, so I'm pretty happy with where things are. While some of my older guides are definitely less helpful, I have no intention of going back and fixing them until I make my guides inevitably an endwalker. Now with that, I will stop being sentimental. Have you ever played DPS and thought to yourself, I really wish I could feel more pain? Well, then you've come to the right place. Summoner is a job that completely changes every expansion, so if you're here because you're hyped for Endwalker and you want to learn Summoner ahead of time, you might as well put this video on your watch later list where you'll never see it again. Why is this actually my last guide? Because this is by far my least played job in Final Fantasy XIV. Summoner and Scholar have a weird relationship where you level both jobs at the same time. This is caused by the removal of cross-classing and a lot of stuff that basically requires explaining the entire lore of version 1.0 to understand what the hell happened to the game mechanics over time. The short version, both jobs use Arcanist as the base class, and both levels Arcanist as you level the job. The only difference is what soulstone that you have equipped. So, I'm a mediocre Scholar player that casually slapped on a Summoner Soulstone and had no idea what was going on. Be prepared for some questionable gameplay footage. Despite my small amount of playtime, I have also learned that thinking about this job also tilts me into another dimension. I have not leveled this job because I leveled Scholar, but I do hear the experience is kinda miserable, as it completely changes every 10 levels. So good luck with that one, and you can probably guess which class you have to start the game as if you want to unlock Summoner as quickly as possible. Historically, Summoner has been known for being very hard to balance, going from strong to weak and not much in between. Although it is usually viable anyways when it is weak. Currently, we are in the strong phase of the Summoner development lifecycle. The thing that actually makes me most upset about this job is nothing to do with the game and everything to do with online resources. Morning has a Summoner guide that reads like it was written by a pompous asshole who's obsessed with the taste of his own cock. Use your fucking dots 42 seconds into combat. Who the hell is your audience? A fucking grandfather clock? You know, how about use your dots when they have 2 seconds remaining? Is that too hard to say? That guide is incredibly in-depth, but it doesn't teach you any of the basics. It is still incredibly helpful for optimizing and being good at the job. So fuck you, and also thank you for the guide, which I will be mostly ignoring. Summoner in Shadowbringers is honestly the hardest job to optimize, in my opinion. But it is not that hard to be mediocre at, and you will still do a shitload of damage as a mediocre player anyways. My goal is to get you off the ground so that you can understand what is even happening at a basic level, and then slap you in the face with some obscure bullshit to give you an idea of why no one likes being good at this job, as well as explain the stupid punishing nature of Summoner because pets suck in Final Fantasy XIV. Everything in this game is a pet, by the way. Ifrit is a pet, Living Shadow is a pet, Boonshin is a pet, Salted Earth is a pet, and Earthly Star is a pet. Pets fucking suck. Why? Because you tell them to do something, and there's a delay between when you click the pet action and the pet actually doing that action, making both Scholar and Summoner feel incredibly unresponsive compared to literally anything else in the game. So get ready for some pet jank when explaining some of the finer, more putrid details of playing this job. To begin, you have 3 different summons that you can have at your side. This is the command that you can use to glamour your eggies to make them look different and like carbuncles. Everyone knows that carbuncles are cooler than the actual Summoner eggies, and you unlock the ability to do this from a quest in the Arcanist Guild after some event, I forget, it's probably just unlocking Summoner. That's most likely the only thing that you wanted to know about this job, but here's how the job is supposed to function. Ifrit, Summon 3, is your pet that does big, single-target damage. It's what you use when fighting one thing. Garuda, just regular old summon, is your pet that does damage to many things at once. The breakpoint for it being better than Ifrit is at 3 enemies or more. Although if you use Garuda for AoE and Ifrit for single target, I don't mind if you don't know the exact breakpoints for everything, but now I've told you. And Titan, Summon 2, exists. You want a use case for Titan? If you're soloing some old content unsynced, Titan can be okay for providing a big shield. It can also have some uses in downtimes in specific fights, but I'm not smart enough to do that anyways. Yeah, Titan used to literally be able to tank for you back when the game was good or some shit. Yeah, back in my day, we used to use Titan to tank random mobs, and we all had massive dicks too. And with that, we can talk about the fundamentals to mashing buttons with feeling. Funding for Misshapen Chair is provided by viewers like you. Thank you, and continue supporting the channel against your will. People always hear on and on about the life cycle summoner rotation and how much it is to manage, and this intimidates players into thinking that this job is harder than it is. This life cycle diagram will only become useful to you once you actually know how to play the job at all. So put it aside for now. What Summoner actually does is this. You have default gameplay, and then you pop Dreadwrym Trance and summon Bahamut. You have a cool Bahamut phase, and then you go back to filler. Then a minute later, you press Firebird Trance and you have a cool Phoenix phase, and then you go back to filler. In other words, you have a burst window with Bahamut, you filler until you have a burst window with Phoenix, you filler, and you keep alternating this forever. Hang on a second. That's just fucking Trick Attack on Ninja. You know, I don't see anyone talking about the fucking Trick Attack life cycle. Okay, the real reason why this sucks is because unlike Trick Attack, the button that makes all this possible, Dreadwrym Trance, is on a 55-second cooldown, despite being used in practice kind of like every 60 seconds. Don't worry about that though, I will help you figure out how to time this stuff properly, but really, Summoner is just a job that fillers and bursts, also known as every fucking other job in the game. Alright, let's start with an opener. You probably think that I'm throwing you into an ocean with no swimming experience, and you are correct. But this does help set up the rest of the rotation, and I can explain things later. While we are here though, shout out again to the Ock Morning Guide where they use the default Eggy icons for everything, so you have to plug the abilities into a cipher to figure out what you're supposed to press. As usual, there are approximately 1 billion different permutations of Summoner openers that you have to learn to be good, so this is just one example. We begin with pre-pull. You want to place your pet a little close to the boss so that it doesn't have to travel across the universe and screw some things up for you. Yes, that is a pet mechanic. No, I am not going to be talking about pre-pull devotion with wiggling your pet properly to delay it, because that's for people who want to be on the downhill of the bell curve. Also, make sure that your pet is Ifrit if you're fighting one or two things. So your simple-minded pre-pull is just precasting Ruin 3 about 2.5 seconds before combat. You also probably want to hit the sick pet action like a half second before as well. Then use Eggy Assault 1, which will be Crimson Cyclone, and double weave Energy Drain and Try Disaster. Now cast Eggy Assault 2, which looks like this. Then you can weave a damage pot. Use Eggy Assault 1 and double weave Aether Pact and Dreadwrym Trance. Use Ruin 3, which will now be instant cast, and weave Inferno. Now use Eggy Assault 2 and double weave Fester and Try Disaster. Don't worry about that yet. Use Ruin 3 and double weave Death Flare and summon Bahamut. Cast Ruin 4 and double weave Enkindle Bahamut and Fester. Cast Ruin 4. We will now cast Ruin 3 2 times in a row with nothing else fancy going on. Now cast Ruin 4 and weave Enkindle Bahamut again. Hard cast a Ruin 3, and then cast Ruin 4 and double weave Energy Drain and Swift Cast. Cast a now instant cast Ruin 3 and weave Fester, and we end this super lengthy opener by casting Eggy Assault 1 after Bahamut leaves. Great. After listening to all of that, you should be thinking, what the fuck just happened? And that's good, you already have the correct mindset, so let's break it down a little bit. The first thing we did in this opener is get all of our shit out as quickly as possible. Kind of. All those Eggy Assault charges will give you stacks of Greater Ruin that changed Ruin 2 into Ruin 4. And we want to have all those Ruin 4s before we summon Bahamut. You can kind of view this opener in having 2 phases with Ifrit and then Bahamut, and god fucking damn it, I just referenced the Ock Morning Guide again. Fine, it has its good points even though I hate it so much. I'd say focus on the first part where you cast all your Eggy Assaults and get the cooldowns out like Devotion and Enkindle Inferno first. Things that will probably make no sense when you first look at it. You will see that we hard refreshed our dots by casting Try Disaster a second time super early. This is similar to when I talked about refreshing dots early on Bard, where you want to snapshot raid buffs, but this actually also helps with timings later on in the rotation, and yes, casting your dots 42 seconds into the encounter later. Just trust me, it will make sense. Also, if you haven't played this Forsaken job before, you probably think, can't you just cast all 4 Eggy Assaults in a row and then summon Bahamut? Fool! You think this shit would behave normally? What is this, a nice fucking job? No, when you press Eggy Assault, there's a delay before when your pet does the action. But not only that, if you want to cast Eggy Assault in things like Inferno or Devotion, it can't do those things at the same time. That's why we have to cast those Ruin 3s in there, so our stupid fucking pet can actually cast everything it's supposed to before we summon Bahamut. The general rule of thumb, just fucking give up. I don't even actually know how this shit works. It's literal magic to me. But I will know that if you follow the opener, it just works. You probably need to cast Ruin 3 after Inferno to ensure that your pet gets that cast, and I know for a fact, you never want to summon Bahamut after an Eggy Assault. Always use an instant cast Ruin 3 to summon Bahamut, or you'll probably ghost the Eggy Assault cast and lose a Ruin 4 stack and ruin your entire rotation. The last thing to mention about the beginning of the opener is that we always double weave Death Flare and summon Bahamut for good reasons that I don't need to elaborate on. It's just a good thing to do. Oh fuck, I should probably mention what Dreadwrym Trance actually does. It will reduce all of your cast times by 2.5 seconds, also known as making everything instant cast except for a very specific Scholar skill that I'm not mentioning. It also lets you cast Death Flare, which will end Dreadwrym Trance immediately, and upon finishing Dreadwrym Trance, you can summon Bahamut. After level 72. Thankfully, I never played the stupid level 70 summoner where it takes 2 Dreadwrym Trances to summon Bahamut, but that's another can of worms that every summoner player has a right to complain about because it's awful. But wait, there's more. Using Dreadwrym Trance also resets the cooldown of Tri-Disaster, which is why we were able to cast 2 of them so quickly in succession despite it normally having a 50-second cooldown. That's pretty much all you need to know about Dreadwrym Trance, but let's talk about Bahamut. Welcome to hell. Bahamut is not a nice dragon. He's a big piece of shit is what he is. You want to have 4 stacks of Greater Ruin before going into Bahamut phase if you can. Why? Well, you need to weave some skills during your Bahamut phase and you need instant cast spells for that. You could just use Ruin 2, but we're trying not to lose DPS since we don't have to. Hence why we want to have 4 Ruin 4s. But not really. You actually don't need 4 instant cast spells to be able to weave everything. The real reason is that every time you cast a spell, Bahamut blasts the enemies with a worm wave. That's cool, but he does this when you finish a spell cast. So you want to end Dreadwrym Trance with 2 instant cast spells, because if you don't, you will finish your last hard-casted spell, Bahamut goes to cast his final worm wave, and he times out before the cast finishes, and you lose damage for no rational reason because you're playing Summoner and you want to feel pain. Yes, punish me more. So your actual goals during Bahamut phase are casting 2 Enkindle Bahamuts so he can blast the enemies with a column of Cum by casting Akmorn, and weaving at least 1 Fester and 1 Energy Drain. I did show you the spicy swift cast optimization to get an extra like 0.25% of a DPS increase, but you can ignore that second Ruin 4 in favor of casting 2 Ruin 4s at the end of your Bahamut phase for a simpler, more easy to understand phase. Congratulations, have fun doing that every other minute when Bahamut comes back up because it sucks. After Bahamut leaves you behind and calls you an idiot for missing those last worm waves that were so obviously intentional, does anyone actually playtest this job at Square HQ? Anyways, we are technically in filler, which is why we have to cast one of those Eggy Assaults soon because you're about to overcap on your stack, and then you have to hard cast your dots. Assuming that everything else is going according to plan, this will be the only time that you have to hard cast your dots for the next 2 minutes. What does filler actually look like on Summoner? I mean, it's pretty easy. Just cast Ruin 3 as much as possible. You can use Eggy Assaults and Ruin 4s for weaving, energy drain, and fester, as well as purely for movement. And that's kind of it. You can only hold 4 Ruin 4s at a time, so you don't want to overcap that by casting an Eggy Assault when you're already at 4 stacks. Try to stay on top of Energy Drain every 30 seconds and get both Festers out before the next Energy Drain comes back up. And don't overcap on Eggy Assault charges. While Summoner technically has a dot minigame on top of the Eggy Assault, Ruin 4, and Energy Drain minigame, the dots are going to be baked into our STEMI summon phases and rotation, so really, these are the only things that you need to stay on top of while casting Ruin 3 for filler. Also, if you really need to move at a point in your filler and you have no other movement tech available, that is when you use Ruin 2. It is obviously not optimal to do so. If you do plan on doing that encounter again, just make sure that you have a piece of movement tech that's better the next time you do that. The only difference between filler before your Phoenix phase and filler before Bahamut is that you don't need 4 stacks of Greater Ruin going into your Phoenix phase. Speaking of which, now that you have been successfully drifting Energy Drain like an idiot during filler, we're about to enter our next burst window and demi summon. After Bahamut leaves, Dreadwrym Trance is now replaced with Firebird Trance. As mentioned earlier, this button has a 55-second cooldown, so you're not going to be using it when it comes back up. Now you might think that this is going to be impossible to time. It's not like you have a timer running on the side that you can look at. How could you possibly know when to press Firebird Trance? Have no fear, that's where the dot timings come in. What you're going to do to get into Firebird Trance in your Phoenix phase is the following. Try Disaster will come off cooldown and your dots will still have a solid chunk of time left on them. The easiest way to time this is simple. You want to use a single Ruin 4 in a weaving window where you will cast Try Disaster when your dots have like less than 2 seconds remaining, and also weave Firebird Trance immediately after. And then we get to do some forbidden shit. You will triple weave Enkindle Phoenix in this window as well. This will stop your GCD from rolling for a split second, and you probably wonder why the fuck I just did that. Well, let me tell you something cool. Phoenix phase will make all your GCD spells instant cast, which is nice, as well as avoiding that bullshit of missing a demi summon attack and requiring instant cast at the end like Bahamut, since you're always instant casting. But I guess when they made this job, they thought that it wasn't janky enough. So when you summon Phoenix, it's going to cast a regen for your party. No matter what you do, this is just what Phoenix does. Don't get me wrong, the regen is actually pretty nice, but if you instantly start casting, you'll end up missing an attack while Phoenix is busy jerking off to how cool Everlasting Flight is. So what this triple weave actually does is give you a properly delayed GCD to ensure that your pet actions line up accordingly. Ah! I'm already about to go nuclear, but I will save the best for last. For now, during Phoenix phase, you just alternate Ruin 3 and Outburst, which are now replaced by Fountain of Fire and Brand of Purgatory. You should be able to weave everything that you need to during Phoenix phase because everything is instant cast. And obviously, since everything is instant cast, you can just move around freely too. Right? Right? Are you fucking kidding me? Holy shit! If you move during your Phoenix phase, Phoenix will try to keep up with you to look all pretty and probably interrupt its own damage skills and cost you DPS? Why? Why? They actually made a spellcaster lose DPS during an instant cast phase? It's like losing DPS while moving during a red mage melee combo, or somehow losing DPS for moving while casting a proc on black mage. That's fucking bullshit! I'm going to apply to the FF14 development team, and I'm gonna fucking fix this shit. That is the stupidest thing in the game I have ever heard of. Jesus. Ghosting on Scholar feels like shit, but at least it's not a fucking DPS loss to use Ruin 2 and Energy Drain for movement on Scholar. This same movement shit also applies to Bahamut too, where you don't really want to move during either trance phase. But why? Why make these spells entirely instant cast during Phoenix if you can't fucking move? Ley lines are more fucking mobile than this stupid instant cast trance phase. I gotta calm down. Where are some cute Nekopara pictures? That's better. Look at how cute they are and wholesome. So yeah, you should be able to get 8 GCDs in under Phoenix phase, which comes out to 4 Fountain of Fires and 4 Brand of Purgatories. That's Phoenix phase with the triple weave and no mobility. If you have high ping though, the triple weave method doesn't work and is actually a DPS loss. So instead, the recommended method on high ping is playing a different job. The last thing I'll mention is that moving during your trances is still a DPS loss, but it's not that significant. I just get fucking frustrated that it's even punishing at all though. It's so fucking stupid. Finally, we are in the last filler phase before Dreadwrym Trance again. The only thing that's different here is that you once again want to try and save 4 stacks of Ruin 4 for Bahamut. This means dumping an extra stack if you need to cast an Eggy Assault, and the same rules apply for using Ruin 3 for filler and trying to save some GCDs for mobility and weaving. You will also want to weave Tri-Disaster when your dots have less than 2 seconds remaining during this filler phase. The thing that's different between this and Phoenix phase is that you will want to press Dreadwrym Trance as soon as it's up rather than drifting this cooldown at all, because that's how we set up the timings for everything with what we did to Firebird Trance earlier. You will need to get Tri-Disaster back up and also weave that Inferno again because it's also back up. And you need to do all of that before you go into your Demi-Summon Burst phase. So make sure to use Ruin 3 and double weave Death Flare and Summon Bahamut in the same window, and we're back to filler for the rest of the rotation. And with that, that's Summoner in a nutshell. There is a ton of other optimization to do, as well as getting used to casting Devotion 3 minutes into combat, which is going to happen before Firebird Trance, so you actually need to ensure that you don't accidentally go into Firebird Trance before you cast your DPS buff. But honestly, if you manage to follow everything up until this point, you have a very strong foundation to literally figure out the rest for yourself. Everything falls into place and makes sense, as long as you're fighting a target dummy with no downtime. However, I consider that to be the core, to set you up for throwing all of this knowledge into the nearest dumpster when Endwalker is released. Oh wait, what's this? Oh fuck, it's that life cycle diagram that I set aside earlier. This is actually a good tool to know what cooldowns come up where for management, useful if you already have a general idea of how the filler plays out. I usually talk about cooldowns to keep track of, but literally the summoner rotation has almost everything baked into it, except for the energy drains and Eggy Assault charges. Energy drain is the cooldown that you have to slap every 30 seconds, and you need to cast 2 Festers before the next one. I already talked about that when explaining the filler, but that is, for me, the most annoying thing to manage. And finally, Devotion is on a 3-minute cooldown. You will want to try to line this up with other raid buffs in your party. However, make sure you never double weave this shit together, or you'll end up ghosting this 3-minute cooldown and cry yourself to sleep. Now let's talk about utility. I already mentioned your DPS buff and that Phoenix will cast a regen to ruin your phase that could have been easy to manage otherwise. Don't forget about the standard cooldowns though, like Addle to reduce raid-wide attacks from bosses because everything is magic damage and they will never make raid-wide attacks physical so that Feint can actually have a use case. You can also use Surecast to make you immune from most knockback and draw-in effects, and also to be able to cast while being paralyzed. While Lucid Dreaming isn't usually 100% necessary, it is how you get mana back, especially if you died and need the mana and your rotation is already completely ruined. That's pretty much everything to think about on Summoner. You don't have dual cast to shit out raises like Red Mage though, but when you need a raise, and especially if your healers are down, Summoner can fill that niche. You also have Physic, that is literally a scholar skill. I mean, no, seriously, it scales with mind and not intelligence. So if you cast that shit, it might heal for maybe 1% of a DPS's health if you're lucky. It's not actually a button. Physic even sucks most of the time on Scholar, and it actually scales on that class. Now that your mind is melting, I'm going to explain AoE just a little bit. Ensure that you're fighting at least 3 enemies when you switch to Garuda Eggy. For your generic filler spells, you want to use Outburst when you're fighting at least 4 enemies, and you have Energy Siphon and Pain Flare to use instead of Energy Drain and Fester. You also want to get your dots down on 1 enemy, and then spraying it to everything using Bane. Ah, yes, Bane. Look at all those dots. Your Eggy Assaults are going to be replaced with Garuda skills. This one does a Kono AoE attack, and this one puts a little bubble down that does damage over time. Still doing things like Dreadwrym Trance and Death Flare and Bahamut stuff and Phoenix stuff all work in AoE for even more swag points. Even if you're freestyling all of this, you can still do a shitload of damage. Summoner AoE is pretty nuts. The only thing that sucks is that you don't have an instant cast AoE GCD for Akmorn during Bahamut phase, but obviously this couldn't have been that clean, or you might actually start enjoying playing the job. But since this video is already super long, here are some other discussions and things to think about with Summoner. At this point, you probably realize that Dreadwrym Trance and Summon Bahamut are technically two different buttons, while Firebird Trance is just one button that instantly starts the phase. Yeah, it's pretty asymmetric and stupid, although what this technically means is that since Dreadwrym Trance is the cooldown that you have to manage for phases, and not actually the Summon Bahamut button, you can spend a little more time in Dreadwrym Trance since it will effectively make almost everything instant cast. It will also shorten how long it takes to hardcast Raise for some real cursed tech. Although you don't generally want to spend too much time in Dreadwrym Trance so that you don't have Bahamut miss out on raid buffs, this is part of planning cooldowns out a bit if there is a big movement section that happens right before you want to summon Bahamut. And you know, your Bahamut phase is a phase where you don't really want to move at all if you can avoid it. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're doing a fight and you find yourself having to move right at the beginning of your Bahamut phase, you might want to spend a little bit more time in Dreadwrym Trance. You don't really get that luxury during ruining your instant cast GCD phase with Phoenix. And kind of while on the topic of mobility, when I talked about Red Mage, I mentioned that I think Summoner is the most mobile caster in the game. Well, during your filler phases, you can literally plan Eggy Assaults and Ruin Force to move, and it is ludicrous how much movement you can fit in. It's almost like playing a physical ranged at some points. The thing about Summoner, though, is that your demi-summon phases, by contrast, are the least mobile of all spellcasters in the game. But what makes Summoner good is that if you plan your phases right, it pretty much gives you the most freedom. So once again, I will state the same thing. You still need a bit of fight experience, but Summoner does feel like the most mobile caster in practice, with Black Mage still being the least, and Red Mage is in between, while still being pretty mobile. I'll summarize my thoughts on Summoner by also including what I feel about Scholar. There are parts to these jobs that I like way more than any other job in their archetype. And there are parts to these jobs that I hate with the passion of 1,000 toxic casuals screaming that they can't press AoE. What a shitload of fuck. The current rumor is that pets are being removed in Endwalker in favor of just making them completely aesthetic rather than actually having the damage skills come from the pet source. If that's the case, maybe it's just what they need to do. But pets have literally never felt responsive in this game, and if they really think that they can't make it work, it's probably for the best. But if you want to play a mage with solid mobility, brings a DPS buff, and a battle raise, just play Red Mage. Now let's get out here and lose our minds during downtime.